Welcome to the Lunchtime Lecture Series here at the Irish Aviation Authority UAS Division. Today we're going to be discussing standard scenarios. My name is David Hansel, and I'm a UAS inspector here at the IAA. Today we're going to be discussing 7 topics which revolve around standard scenarios. We'll start, as we always do in aviation, with the regulations that underpin standard scenarios. We'll talk generally about what a standard scenario is, and then we'll dive a bit deeper into the 2 types of standard scenarios, standard scenario 1 and 2. We'll then move on to the declaration process, or how you apply to conduct a standard scenario. We'll touch briefly on remote pilot and UAS operator requirements and obligations, and then we'll close with some commonly asked questions that we hear a lot when people approach us about conducting a standard scenario. So, as I said, as we always do with everything in aviation, we look first to the regulations to guide us on how we can prepare for and then conduct these operations. And those are going to be found in very familiar 947 and 945 of 2019. Particularly, we want to turn our focus additionally to Appendix 1 for standard scenarios supporting a declaration. That is the bulk of the information around conducting standard scenarios. Everything you need to successfully apply for and conduct a standard scenario operation can be found in there. We'll also look to the AMC for the Regulation 947, Issue 1, or Amendment 3, and then we'll touch very briefly on Article 11, the rules for conducting an operational risk assessment. There is a connection in how you contemplate STSs when you're thinking about calculating risk, doing a risk analysis, and that's all spelled out there in the SORA edition from December 2020. So it's an important reference. It's not used very much, but it's an important part of what we want to do when we contemplate standard scenarios nonetheless. So generally speaking, what is an STS? So if you go back to 2020, the EASA team, UAS team decided that they wanted to put together basically a book, for lack of a better term, that an operator could simply pull off a shelf. And if they met the constraints of what was defined in there for the operational profile, the UAS being used, its capabilities, and the mitigations contained therein, that they could conduct that operation without having to go through a longer operational authorization process. And that became known as the standard scenario. It is a way for operators to conduct specific category operations, so outside the framework of an open category operation, without having to go through a SORA or an LUC application or a PDRA. In doing that, EASA wanted to create an incentive for operators to contemplate their forecasted operations within those constructs. So the encouragement from them is, as you're thinking about an operation, you should be thinking to yourself, can I conduct this operation within the framework of what is defined in either STS-01 or STS-02? And in doing so, that gives us, the competent authority, once you make the declaration, the confidence that you have the mitigations in place. We are satisfied with the declarations that you make, that when you conduct this type of operation, you are able to conduct it safely, first and foremost. What this also allows you to do, as I said previously, is to circumvent the long OA process, the long operational authorization process, which is defined here in UAS Spec 030. 40 relates to how we issue those authorizations. 030 is about how operators apply for those authorizations. And basically what it becomes is just a much more streamlined back and forth between the National Aviation Authority on the left and the UAS operator here on the right. You provide us with a declaration. We confirm that we have received it and that it is complete. In doing so, we both know, you and the regulator know, that you have mitigation measures which are easily implemented to conduct this operation safely across the EU. So what are the 2 STSs that are available to us? Let's talk sort of high level about them right now. You first have STS-01. With STS-01, you'll need to fly a UAS that has a C5 class marking, and we'll dive into those class markings here in a moment. That operation must be conducted within visual line of sight, and you can conduct this operation in an area, a ground area, that is populated. You can fly over people. Again, must remain within VLOS, no higher than 120 meters, and you must be in an airspace that has a low risk of encounter with manned aircraft. For STS-02, we moved to a class C6 drone, and this operation can be conducted BVLOS. So it gives you an opportunity to go beyond line of sight if you're using an AO out to 2 kilometers or staying within 1 kilometer if you do not have an AO, but you lose the ability to fly over populated areas. So no non-participants in your ground area. Again, same restrictions on altitude and on airspace, 120 meters of height and low risk of encounter with manned aircraft. So very straightforward. STS-01, C5, populated areas, VLOS under 120, and STS-02, we move to C6, sparsely populated areas, BVLOS or BLOS, and under 120 meters AGL. So now let's dive a little more deeply into exactly what that looks like. For STS-01, this is what we envision, an operation that's taking place within a flight geography surrounded by a contingency area, which becomes your contingency volume, and then another circle around that, your ground risk buffer. The calculations for how to define these can be located here. Down at the bottom, you'll see UAM 008. That's UAS Advisory Memorandum 8, which is located on our website, which is guidance on defining flight geography, contingency area, and ground risk buffers. And again, we see these requirements for the UAS, VLOS over a controlled ground area in a populated environment, untethered. So again, stay within VLOS, 120 meters. Obstacle heights, this again, nothing new to any of us who are flying. 50 meters laterally from some sort of structure gets you an additional 15 meters above that, provided you have the consent of the owner. No dangerous goods, fairly standard in UAS operations, and you have that defined controlled ground area, and that would be depicted in your operations manual, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Of note, you also need to have a ground speed of under 5 meters per second, which is about 18 kilometers per hour, a trained remote pilot, and that C5 class marked UAS, as I had mentioned. So what does that mean? What is a C5 drone? A lot of us know what that is, but the EASA definition is shown here. Your drone weighs less than 25 kilograms. It has a low speed mode below 5 meters per second. You are able to get an indication of noise emissions, and it has direct remote ID. Low battery, and this is where you see a big difference between the C0 to 4 and the C5 and 6, a flight termination system. So you have something that can stop the drone should it begin flyaway, an FTS, a PRS, all those systems that you don't see in C0s through C4s. And then you have something providing information on the drone position, speed, and altitude. So a key distinction there from the C5 and C6 to the C0 through C4. So now let's talk about STS-02. What does that look like? STS-02 is where you can begin to conduct BVLOS or BLOS operations. You can do that out to 1 kilometer or as far as 2 kilometers in the circle here on the right, if you're utilizing an airspace observer. So basically, you're in the center, you have an observer 1 kilometer away from you, the drone can go 1 kilometer away from them. Same altitude restrictions of 120 meters. UAS has to have that C6 class identification, and you must ensure there are no uninvolved people present in your controlled ground area. So another difference between the STS-01 and the STS-02. And then we look at C6 and what is different about C6 from C5. So low speed mode is no longer a requirement in a C6 drone, and you do have to have some sort of geocaching function. Because you're moving out to as far as 2 kilometers, you want to know that there is a backup within the system that will prevent it from going beyond that 1 kilometer from you or 1 additional kilometer from your AO if they're 1 kilometer from you, the operator. So let's talk then about, now that we understand what an STS is, how do you actually go ahead and apply to do that? In support of furthering the opportunity for operators to apply for STSs, last month our office issued UAS Advisory Memorandum number 17 at the urging of some of our partners. We put that together, and published that so that people would have an understanding of the processing timelines for completing and getting back an STS and the actual instructions of like, how do I actually do this? The instructions are grounded in UAS Spec 20, which is available in the regulation. The UAS advisory memorandum can be found at this link shown at the bottom of the slide. And basically, it's divided into an operator responsibility section and a regulator responsibility section. And this first section in the next slide that I'll talk about are responsibilities for the operator. You must make sure that the drone meets certain characteristics, and those are listed here for size, whether you're VLOS or BVLOS. So again, STS-01 or STS-02. It gives you some altitude restrictions, the same 120, and then those restrictions for whether you are in close proximity to manned aircraft, which is not going to be allowed in this. Again, operator responsibility. And then that the sort of the administrative aspects of the application are complete. You are declaring that these 4 things are true and will be true for all of your operations within this STS. Our obligation, as defined in Spec 20, is to receive that, review it, verify that the declaration contains everything that it needs to contain, as defined in point 2 on that previous slide, and then confirm receipt and completeness without undue delay. And that without undue delay is really an important thing to note. The regulation itself does not define what without undue delay means. But the incentive for us in these cases and the vision that EASA had is that these applications do not take the 90 days, 6 months, 9 months that it might take for us to iterate back and forth on another type of operational authorization. Instead, the last one of these that I completed, once we had received it, we had it done in 2 days. So that's about our average, but without undue delay is the marker that EASA lays out for us, and that's our vision moving forward. And we'll talk about how we identify those so that we can ensure that we do actually process those expeditiously. And this is the IAA responsibility. So in order to apply, what we ask you to do is complete the operational declaration form, which can be found in Appendix 2 of 947. Identify therein which type of STS you intend to conduct. It's a simple check mark. And then provide us with the supporting information, which includes your operator registration, your remote pilot certificate of competency, and your insurance certificate. Email all of that to us at our drones@iaa.ie email address and include in the subject line STS Operational Declaration Submission. In doing that, you'll throw up a flag in our email system that will identify to us that this has to be processed without any undue delay. So if you follow these steps, we will begin processing it as soon as we get our eyes on it. That's better for you, it's better for us. This is what the form looks like. Again, very, very simple. When you put this next to a SORA application, it's not even close. It's not even in the same field. So let's talk about some of the common errors that we do see in these STS declarations. First and foremost, very simple, incorrect registration numbers. We do have to check those to make sure that those match with the operator who's applying. So make sure you open up your registration certificate, copy the number, paste it in here. That makes life easy for everyone. This next one is probably what we see most frequently, which is a mismatch between the STS type that you wish to conduct and the manufacturer and model name error. And it's actually an understandable error to be made. Let's say, as an example, you have a DJI Mavic Pro, Mavic 3 Pro. So UAS manufacturer would be DJI, UAS model would be the Mavic 3 Pro. The Mavic 3 Pro is not a C5 drone. In order to be a C5 drone, it has to be modified aftermarket. And there are a number of providers out there who do that. As an example, Dronavia has the Kronos kit. And when installed, that becomes a C5 drone. It converts your drone to a C5 capable drone. So in order to verify the compliance, to verify that you have put that equipment on there, we ask that for manufacturer, in this case, you would put Dronavia, and then for the UAS model, it would be the Mavic Chronos or Chronos Mavic, whatever verbiage they use on their certificate of conformity. That's the same thing you will put in here for manufacturer and model. That ties to this STS type and class error. Again, if you put a DJI Mavic 3 Pro, you cannot do an STS-01 with that because it's not a C5 UAS. So we ask you to just be mindful of that. And then insurance errors. This is an interesting one, also very understandable, not anything really attributable to UAS operators, but more to how the insurance industry writes their documents. When you purchase a drone insurance policy, you typically get a proof of coverage that has a, let's say, a year period. So you're good from February of last year to February of this year. And then in parentheses, they often put in effect until canceled, and they don't send you any more paperwork. Unfortunately, I have an obligation to the public here in Ireland through our statutory instruments and the EASA regulations to verify that you have insurance. So if all you send me is a document that says that, I'm going to come back to you and say, I need you to provide me proof that you did not cancel it. So whether that's additional billing information, receipts for payments, or an updated certificate saying you are presently covered, we're going to ask for that if you send us just the insurance rider or proof of coverage with that statement on there that says good unless canceled or good until canceled. That does not, unfortunately, answer the mail for us here at the IAA. Now let's talk about the remote pilot and UAS operator requirements. As I'm sure you can imagine, in order to fly these types of operations, they are outside of the framework of the open category, and they are more in the specific category. So you will need a remote pilot with an STS endorsement on their remote pilot certificate of competency. In order to obtain that, it's sort of a two-phase process. First, you must complete theoretical training. There are providers online who can assist with that, and you must complete that. Following that, you must complete practical training for STSs. Once the student pilot reaches the desired level of competence, the organization that provided the practical training will then issue what's called an attestation of practical training to us to confirm that you have that experience. Both a recognized training entity or an operator who has made a declaration that they are in compliance with these training requirements can issue this attestation. So it doesn't have to be an RTE that does that. It can be an organization that has previously declared that they are compliant with these things. The training is fantastic. It covers everything that's spelled out in the annex to the implementing Regulation 947, which is UAS operations in the open and specific categories. Specifically, Attachment A, which describes both the theoretical knowledge and the practical skills required for STS-01, and then a section about STS-02. Again, the key difference you're going to see there in terms of operation because of the implementation of two factors, BV loss or B loss, and the use of airspace observers. Those are going to be integrated into the STS-2 section, STS-020, excuse me, as it's written in the attachment. That's what you're going to see the big difference in there is how you are onboarding and utilizing and monitoring those functions. And once you complete all that, you'll get what we've all seen here several times, this lovely amber box here, which says STS. Fairly straightforward process. Again, the training is really, really valuable, and it really does have you think in a different way about how we conduct these kinds of operations. So that's on the remote pilot side. There are additional obligations for UAS operators. There are 10 requirements that are spelled out there in UAS STS-01.030. And there is a section, again, for 02, and I'm sure you can guess, that's the addition and integration of the airspace observer role. And these 10 requirements are spelled out of particular note, and I really do want to spend some time focusing on this, is the necessity to have an operations manual. In addition to describing things like your operational volume, your ground risk buffer, your ERP, your control of ground area, UAS conformity, things along those lines, one of the biggest hurdles is having a complete operations manual. The manner in which you must complete an operations manual is defined in Appendix 5 of the regulation. If you open Appendix 5 and study that, everything that we can conduct oversight on in an operations manual is defined there in Appendix 5. Now, you'll note when you do your declaration, you do not have to send us your operations manual. However, you are declaring that you have one. And the moment we confirm receipt and completeness of your declaration, you are subject to IAA oversight and you will need to have those. So if you got that receipt on Tuesday, on Wednesday, we could email you and say, please provide us with all of this additional information. So just something to be mindful of. But again, for the operations manual, look to Appendix 5 on how to complete that if you want to do that on your own. So let's talk just very briefly about some of the frequently asked questions that we get regarding STS declarations and operations. Can you do these overseas? Absolutely, you can. EASA envisioned this process. It's very straightforward. The first step is the same. You do your declaration to us. We return to you confirmation of receipt and completeness. That's step one. You fly to your EU country where you're conducting business, and you provide that confirmation of receipt and completeness to the aviation authority in your target country. So if you're flying in France, you would send that to the French. If you're flying in Germany, send it to the Germans. Fairly straightforward, nothing confusing about that. And that is it. And in that construct, you are able to fly there as you would here. Very, very straightforward. And that has been EASA's vision for quite some time now. You may find over time that the two STSs available to you don't really meet your operational needs, and you'd like to propose new standard scenarios. EASA would love to hear from you. This is a really important partnership effort that EASA has been pushing for some time. If you have an idea for a new STS, put it together and send it to drones@easa.europa.eu. And this is where I told you very briefly at the outset that there was some necessity to understand the SORA process, and there's a reference to the SORA regulation. As of right now, STSs are only possible for operations that are classified as Sale 2. So you must be in that low risk category, no medium or high risk operations Sale level 3 or higher. So something to be mindful of if you're putting together something and it falls down as a Sale 4 and you'd like to have that as an STS, unfortunately that can't happen. So I don't want to say that to preclude people from reaching out to EASA if they have new ideas, whether it's about containment, PRSs, FTSs. We get better as a community because the people who are innovating and operating are thinking about these things in new and exciting ways. And so we really want to encourage partners to continue that iterative back and forth, both with us and with EASA. If you want to copy us on that email so that we can be in the loop on what you're thinking, certainly not required, but it is absolutely something we would appreciate the opportunity to work with you on. So in conclusion, this has been the presentation on standard scenarios, also known as STSs. Very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to operators, folks who are thinking about getting into this field every day. It is an important part of outreach here at the IAA, but that outreach is not simply a one-way street. If you have comments, questions, concerns, or feedback, we would love to hear it. Please do email us at drones@iaa.ie. All of us here in the office monitor that email box, and we do make an effort to ensure we respond in a timely fashion to all of our partners. So again, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the presentation.